Y'all, welcome back. Mike Doyle is with us from North Carolina. And originally Becky was going to introduce you, Mike, but since Becky's not here, we're actually going to let you introduce yourself so that we don't bumble through it too badly.
Oh, sure. That's not a problem at all. So quick introduction. So I am, well, let me say, so presently I work for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services as a public health entomologist. So I kind of oversee the mosquito disease issues here in North Carolina. There's two of us. I work with mosquitoes, and my colleague, Dr. Alexis Barbrin, works with ticks. So we've kind of split the state by pest or by a disease agent, not by a geography. And let's see, hold on. Am I sharing a screen right now? Nope, you can see me in the sailboat in the back? Okay, perfect. Okay, so but for this purpose is when Becky asked me to do this, I'm stepping back 5 years before my job. So I have to say that whatever I say here is from my position in the Florida Keys and does not represent the views of the state of North Carolina or my division, because this is all pre-North Carolina. So kind of going back in a case study. So so that's my position now. I'm an entomologist, and we've worked with mosquitoes for 20 years now, I guess, 25, something like that. And I'll share a little of that history during the talk. Sorry for my clicking. I'm trying to get, I have 3 screens going right now, so I'm trying to figure out which one's working. Just one moment. Okay. Am I sharing now? See a thumbs up. Okay, good. So should I get started?
Please do.
All right. All right. And please keep an eye on the time. I did this talk several years ago, or many of these slides, and it gets kind of involved. So I want to make sure that I stay on time. So we need to be done 12:30-ish and then time for questions. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, right in that range. And Mike, I'm happy to keep an eye on the questions that come through on the chat and the comments. So we can just kind of save those till the end and address them at those at that time.
That sounds good. All right. So so I was very excited when Becky asked for me to speak about this. This is something that I haven't worked directly with for the last 5 years since I've come to North Carolina. My role changed, and I've left the genetically engineered mosquitoes behind for some time. I've kept up on it with colleagues and former commissioners and whatnot, but been focusing on lacrosse and other diseases. So this is kind of a good look back after time. It's secondly a good way to look at, like, how does one get to a project like this or a place like this. So when I heard that I'd be working with teachers today, I thought I'd jump back into the early developmental years of becoming a scientist, and it's sort of a thank you. So to start off with, let's see if I can get this to work. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so to start off, where does young scientist get his start? Well, this is not an exciting, like an exotic place like Key West, but Cincinnati, Ohio, not quite so exciting. Lots of gray skies and dreary days back there. But started like in grade school. I was always interested in bugs and birds and anything that moved and ran outside, so flew. And also at the time, I was hardly to believe by a lot of people now, but I had a really bad speech impediment, a lisp, and I didn't speak hardly at all. I was not your ideal student, never raised my hand, always kind of hid in the back, tried to stay out of the way. And but that changed because of the help of several good teachers. And now they probably wish I didn't speak so much, but but I'll try to keep it at a minimum. So if you take that very spot and go up about 300 feet, this is a playground. It's an ordinary grade school playground, but lo and behold, if you look closely, there were tunnel spiders up in that corner of the playground under the trees. And over here was a sandy area that held lots of ants. There were several ant hills there. And partly because of the lisp and whatnot, I kept to myself. And I spent most of my time like this little kid looking at the bugs. And I was not an ideal student. I had kind of rebellious streak for a couple different reasons. And so if you have troublesome students, have hope. If you get them in the right direction, they turn out okay.
Hey, Mike, I hate to interrupt.
Yes.
I think we're seeing your we're not seeing your presenter view. We're still seeing your PowerPoint window.
Okay. Thank you for interrupting. Let me go back to the share screen. Hold on. Yeah, it goes to a different screen. Can I get out of that? Hold on. Let me go back to you. And it doesn't want me to go back to you.
Yeah, that picture makes a lot more sense now that we can see that one with the playground.
Oh, you know, okay, good. Here, let me change. Oh, shoot, hold on. This is the first time I've done a presentation with Zoom. So let me change the screen that I'm sharing from, but I've lost the screen sharing ability.
So let me see if I can help.
1 sec. Oh, here we go. I'll change to a different screen. Oh, it is screen one. Okay. Now you can see it. Okay, so do you see the school there?
Perfect.
All right. Yeah, like I said, I'm seeing 3 different screens. I'm not sure which one you're seeing. And see if I can actually get to advance. All right. Picture's moving?
Yes, everything looks great.
Okay. Yep. So there's this tunnel spiders in the anthill, and there's a kid who is not me, but that is what I spent most of my time doing. But things changed when I got to the fifth grade science. I was a difficult science kid in this class, and quite a handful according to Miss Finn. But she normally, by the way, for this picture, I needed background on this. This was the 1976 bicentennial celebration. So everybody dressed up in like colonial and different garb. They didn't normally dress like this in my grade school, but it's the only picture I could find of her. But she was kind, but she was tough. She didn't really go into my rebelliousness so much, but like David was saying, she didn't confront me directly because I probably would have rebelled at that. But she got interested in ants. And so I had mentioned I had an ant farm. And so she asked me to bring it in and show it to the kids in class. And I started talking, which was unusual at the time, but was so interested in the ants that that I overcame the shyness and got to bring it in and set it on the side and also I watched the ants quite a bit during class. That kept me busy enough that I didn't get in as much in trouble at the time. But that child isn't me either. But this picture here, if you can see, that is me there in the lower right-hand corner at the bicentennial celebration. But that was a science class, and that got me interested in science. Her interest in me and kind of putting me in the right direction got a kind of a positive feedback going, and I started paying attention and actually getting good grades in science classes. Going to high school, continued that, and there was a Mr. Dan Crimer. We called him Chrome Dome Crimer. Everyone who we liked got a nickname, he was a good teacher. He was actually not a good student himself and admitted that, which we, some of us connected to. But tell you a quick story just to get a picture of how science was interesting. So one day he comes into class and puts a basketball on his desk. Doesn't say anything, just starts doing his normal science, chemistry lecture. Let it sit there for 4 or 5 minutes. And then he goes into the closet and brings out a volleyball, puts that on his desk, still doesn't say anything. Got us wondering what in the world is he talking about and what does this have to do with it? Now the school is a very athletic school, lots of state championships and whatnot, all male school, Catholic school, very competitive. So seeing basketballs and volleyballs wasn't too odd, except not in the middle of chemistry class. A few minutes later, he brings out 4 ping pong balls, all of them black, which was kind of odd. Sets those down next to the others, still didn't say anything. Then a few minutes after that, the cross country coach, if I remember right, steps in and whispers to him. And then they get 4 guys from the class and bring them in the front and whisper to the guys, hand each of them a black ping pong ball, and they all run out of the room. We didn't know what was going on. Still didn't say anything, which really got our attention. And then we noticed there was a map on the wall, which was not normally there. There's a cross-country guys, not the actual ones. Those are recent ones. But we had just won state in cross-country the year before, so there was a couple fast guys in the room. So they were all gone out somewhere. So we look at the map, and we noticed that there were some dots on the map, all pretty much equidistant from our school, which was in the center where you can see the little basketball and volleyball sitting there. That was where the school was sitting. So TJ kept looking at his watch, and after a few minutes, he stopped and he said, "Okay, right now, all those ping pong balls are at those points. You know, one is up in a park that we knew of. One was down at the railroad tracks, down going into Cincinnati. One was at a well-known street corner, and the 4th one was at my favorite place, McDonald's, that I knew quite well, over by my house." And he said, "They're all right there right now. They're all approximately 2 miles away." We said, "What's the point of that?" So then he drew a big circle around it and said, "If I'm holding this volleyball or this basketball, this is a neutron. About 3/4 the size of that is this volleyball, which is the proton. And electrons are roughly, you can measure them, or they've had a shape, were roughly the size of 1,836 times smaller than that, about the size of a ping pong ball." And we're like, "So," and he said, "Standing right now, your classmates, all 2 miles away, if we were a deuterium atom or with 1 electron, that electron would be moving so fast it would be in all 4 of those places basically at the same time and about that far away." The point being that an atom, which I had thought at that point was some like solid little ball, is actually mostly air. That the space in it is just basically the space between a volleyball, a basketball, if they're a neutron and proton, and the electrons are that far away. And all of us knew how far that was. Several of us ran cross country and whatnot and passed those places or drove by them. And that shocked me, quite honestly. You know, chemistry was quite boring to me at the time, mostly math. I didn't really like it. But when I realized that the space that kind of added this 3rd dimension to science, that it wasn't just numbers and getting answers on a piece of paper, but it was space and time and speed, I was hooked. I never became a chemist, but the need for chemistry and the understanding of chemistry and how that all fits into biology and astronomy and all those other things, it all started connecting. And I decided, that I wanted to go into the sciences. So long story short, I got a biology, geology degree, went on a short stint in the Peace Corps and did some mosquito related jobs, and then ended up in Key West, which is actually the main topic of our conversation today. So approximately 30 years after that, the chemistry lesson in our high school classroom, I found myself in the Florida Keys. And if you're not familiar with the Keys, it's a very unique place. It's barely the United States. It's more like a foreign country than it is, part of the U.S. There is 1 road, 41 uninhabited islands, and 44 bridges across them. It's about 130 miles from one end to the other. Miami is here above the right-hand corner. A quick question, Michael. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
You can. Okay. All right. Great. I'll try not to move too much. I've been doing it out of just nervous habit. But Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Miami are right up here. Here's Key Largo from the famous Beach Boys song and all of that. But it's a unique place. And I found myself working down there as the director of mosquito control. I'll explain how that happened in a minute. But the place is more water than land. And this is, pretty typical look. This is on the 7 Mile Bridge, which I believe is the longest overwater bridge in the United States. It's an unusual place up in the top corner, accused of being weirdos. Someplace else can come mingle with real weirdos, which is not that far off. It's a really unusual place. The picture, that's one of the city commissioners. He's also owns most of the bars and strip clubs on the main drag too. So it has a very unique character. It's most southern island in those keys. It's 6 by 2 kilometers. It's roughly 3 square miles, densely populated, about 25,000 people. And in that 3 square miles, the property value is about 21 billion. So 75,000 residents, I'm sorry, all the keys is 21 billion. Key West is probably 2/3, 3/4 of that value. So high value, small area. The reason I got involved down there is, and the reason this whole public relations campaign, part campaign, part fiasco happened, was that in 2009, dengue fever was reported locally transmitted in Key West. And this was a shock to the Keys economy. It was during the recession, so things were bad anyway. No cases had been reported since 1936 in the United States. That was in Miami, just nearby. And there were 27 total reported cases in 3 square miles, approximately 25,000 people. So sort of like 1 in 1,000 rate, if you look at it that way. However, as we talked before with La Crosse earlier this morning, the number of reported cases, the number of actual cases are never the same. Usually the reported is some fraction. What the fraction is, we rarely know. But CDC came down in 2009, this is before, a couple of years before I arrived, and found that through a SERA survey, they estimated 3 to 5% of Key West residents, or at least of Old Town residents. And Old Town is a kind of most urban part of Key West. You can see on that picture, it's the end of the island, sort of the old part of the island, 3 to 5%. So if you do the math with that, it comes out somewhere of the 27 reported cases, there were actually somewhere between 600 and 1,000 actual cases. So you can see how the difference in reported and actual turns out. And you'll keep that number in mind, that it's 600 to 1,000, perhaps more, when you hear some of these videos, a video clip I show you in a few minutes. So the response for the mosquito control district was big. And keep in mind, the mosquito control district there is the 4th largest employer in the county, and about 100 employees or so in one of the larger budgets. So they do a lot of mosquito control by air. There's 4 airplanes, 4 helicopters, 2 airplanes at the time. So they took a helicopter and used NALID, it's pretty rough organophosphate, and sprayed the entire island every 2 days for 2 months. And so high intensity chemical use. That's pretty much unheard of, even in Florida, which does a lot of aerial spraying. They also hired 11 full-time inspectors out of, at the time they said there was about 80 full-time employees to work in Key West in those 3 square miles, plus 23 employees came and worked 60 hours a week for 6 weeks, going yard to yard to yard, cleaning every single yard. They got to every yard once a week in the entire city. Then they took a truck and sprayed 2 to 3 times per week in most of the city for 2 months. And finally, did a very intensive public education program about cleaning your yard for about a 6-month period. That was the response. Here's the aerial adulticide in the helicopter you can see the red is basically the entirety of the populated section of the city. And the 6-week blitzkrieg, they called it, was trying to reduce this Aedes aegypti population. So they worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and checked all 6,000 houses once a week. And checking means going in, checking and treating, not just looking. They actually did all the dumping too. And did it work? And this is the tough reality of theory versus reality. It didn't. The following year, there were 66 more reported cases. How many more actual infections? We don't know, because CDC was asked not to come back and do any more surveys. There was a kind of rift between the city commission and CDC. I won't get into details, but it was all about communication and how the cases there were communicated to the public and what impact that has on their tourist economy. So, quick summary of that. Oxitec, which is the company out of England, had this genetically modified mosquito. So they met with the director there, who preceded me, and agreed to do a pilot trial in the Keys. And there were a lot of discussions with U.S. and federal agencies, could not find anyone to regulate the activity. And but there was no attempts to do public involvement or any at that time. And we can talk about what could have been done and what should have been done. But there was also a highly negative relationship with the local media. I'll explain why. And because of all the problems they're having with dengue, there were many new tools being looked at. If you can imagine it, they were probably thinking of it because they were realizing that sort of the traditional tools were not working. To get it put in perspective, one commentary, resignation of bug board's director may end a scandal story that started in 1993. The director ended up being forced to leave early in 2011. And so pretty much all projects like that were stopped, including public relations at that point. To give you sort of a picture, these are some headlines. Focus on bug board spending is overdue. Again, this is during the recession. So raising taxes was a negative public thing. Tumult marks 2010 for mosquito control. Finally, this is in August. Judge gives Spoto 3 months in jail. Spoto was the assistant director, and he was put in jail for grand theft from the mosquito control district. And oddly enough, at the same time, Doyle accepts bug district's top position. So that was the way to start the job down there. Is kind of ironic. They probably did that on purpose, now that I think about it, but put them both together. But it's Mr. Spoto left and I arrived. So that gives you a picture of sort of the real life of some public relations issues, that it's not in a vacuum, that what's happening on the ground really affects your public messaging and what you can and can't do. So late in 2011, I'd been there maybe 3 months. Because the other things weren't working, I requested to the board that we move ahead with genetic modified mosquito project, at least with some kind of small pilot project. And so our lawyers advised the board to establish a contract. There were no regulations about this, which led to a very unexpected but difficult statement by one of the commissioners saying, well, if nothing prohibits doing a release of genetically modified mosquitoes, if there's no regulations against it, then let's just do it. And earlier in the meeting, they'd asked me how long it would take to organize it. And I said, oh, a couple of, 6 weeks, a couple of months to organize technically how to do something like this. So then the media picked up that we were going to do a release in 6 weeks, which was incorrect, but that became the public perception. And we had no one had jurisdiction to do this. It's also at the time public, lots of articles start showing up all over the country. And they used a lot of words like unleashed. And Julie, I would love to hear your thoughts on the use of words, particular words, and either intentionally or unintentionally, but we saw lots of words like this: unleashed, oh, lots more. You'll see some in some of these things. So words are important. I won't go over all these details, but this gives you an idea of what kind of education. I said we need to do as much education as possible. This is starting in 2012, but the horse was out of the barn, as they say. At that point, the local news had already started announcing that we had a planned release in 6 weeks, which wasn't true, but that became the public reality of it. So there were citizen articles in newspapers. I did radio interviews almost weekly, public outreach and festivals. I'll start doing public engagements and presentations at high schools, different schools, and to adults at like homeowners associations, to try to kind of catch up with the public perception and start trying to change what was out there. So fortunately, some academics got involved who actually knew what they were doing in terms of gauging perception. So CDC came down with Florida Department of Health, our local county health department, and Case Western University in 2011, late 2011, to do a survey to see what the public, after this 6-month campaign, this is the post survey, knew about mosquitoes in general, what they had done, and how they responded to our public education event. And the event was essentially, please clean up your yards and get rid of standing water. So after the survey, this is the post survey, that 82% of the year-round residents said they had done something in the previous 3 months to get rid of water on their property. That's a big success. 82% of the people heard us. That they took action was associated with our outreach efforts. That was also a big plus. But when we went to the houses, 11% of the houses we went to were positive for Aedes aegypti larvae, which is high. If you look, if it's hard to judge this, but for dengue transmission, it's a very rough number, but most studies point to somewhere around 5%. If 5% or more houses have larvae, this is a very complicated way to method, but roughly speaking, if more than 5% have larvae, then transmission is possible. So we are still at more than double our goal of the number of houses with larvae. But what was most disturbing to us is that this was, I guess, an obtrusive method, was that we had inspectors go to all the houses of the people who had been surveyed, and 91% of the 55 properties that were infested, the people had replied that they had cleaned up their yards. So they had heard us, they had done something to clean up, and most had done cleanup, but the inspectors who know this sneaky mosquito very well were still able to find larvae on their property. So it was discouraging that people were trying to help, but even that trying to help wasn't getting rid of all the mosquitoes. And that's partly because this mosquito is exceptionally tricky. They found mosquitoes living like inside of pool furniture, like literally in the tubes inside, that you would never think. You look at a beautiful yard and you think there's nothing there, and here there's larvae growing inside of things that you'd never think could hold water. So to respond to that, we started in sort of the public relations thing, we switched to a natural bacteria instead of doing the hard adulticiding with an organophosphate. We switched to a bacteria, a very non-toxic bacteria that we start spraying over the city. First time it had ever been done, I had to get the label changed. That was a big deal, but much more environmentally friendly, trying to help with the view the district just not being, chemical spray jockeys, as some people called us. And so we started spraying for 4 years, actually, with this larvicide over the city, which turned out to be pretty effective on the whole. But still, our levels were above what was acceptable for transmission. And we were always worried the transmission, it was going to be coming back. So in 2012, the FDA announced that it did have jurisdiction. And so now there was a process. We stopped any talk of releases and just worked on public relations entirely. But that point had already heated up. There was a town hall meeting, which I'll show you in just a minute. And the Key West City Commission had put a resolution out against the release without further research. And so we started doing face-to-face surveys. And there was 2 done, one by my staff, which I admit was probably biased because my staff was doing it. And then secondly, North Carolina State University came down and did a formal academic study. Can you guys hear me okay? I keep getting a signal saying that I have an unstable connection. Okay, good. All right. So here's the first survey. This was a face-to-face survey done by my staff, just range finding. We didn't pretend this was anything official, but just wanted to get an idea. And we found that roughly 2/3 of the population felt that releasing GM mosquitoes was either positive, or neutral. About 25% were against it, and 7% had never heard of it at that point, which shocked me, actually, that no one had heard of it, given all of the public things going on. But you kind of have to know Key West in a way. There's some people who go there to escape from everything, and so they intentionally aren't connected to media of any kind. Then this video came out. It was a film that was done by a small movie or director who came down, and I'm going to try at this point to do like 4 minutes of this. Is that okay, Michael? Okay, so to do that, I have it queued up in Vimeo on a different screen. So do I stop sharing and then start sharing that screen? Okay, just 1 sec. Let me get back to us.
And just make sure you've got the checkbox for share, excuse me,
Right.
Share computer audio.
Okay, just 1 second. How do I get, my Vimeo is highly minimized. Let's see. I just can't get to anything. I can't see anything other than a couple small screens. Sorry for the delay here. If I drop the meeting, my apologies.
Sorry, we'll just go home early. Actually, we're already home.
That's right. Okay, so Michael, all I have is a sidebar with the the photos of all of the participants on it. I cannot get back to the main screen.
So let me do this. I'm gonna hit stop for a second.
Oh, perfect.
And maybe that'll nuke it, and then
Yep.
you can.
You nuked it. Perfect. All right, I'm going back to share screen. 10 people on the whole who go door to door.
That's it.
The drains and such. And with that number of people, even in a small town like Key West, for them to get to every residence once a month is very difficult to do.
Mosquito control. Thanks. And we check things and we get things situated in yards, and then we come back a week later and everything's changed. And there's more breeding. He knows we come here. I talk to him all the time. Unfortunately, he's one of the people that he didn't recognize me, even though I talk to him every time I come here. So he doesn't really get out into his yard and keep things the way they should be. We talk to people and they hear what we're saying, but they don't actually do what they're supposed to do. That causes us to have to go back to their yard more often than others. When I checked that last week, that little flower pot only had probably 2 inches of water in it, and there were probably upwards of 100 larvae. And that was all the Aedes aegypti.
Here in the United States, we've been
I'm going to
basically
skip forward
free
just
of
a little bit.
enormously low numbers compared to
now confirmed in Key West.
Dengue fever is a potentially fatal virus that affects more than 50 million people a year. It's usually transmitted through a single species of mosquito, Aedes aegypti, that only lives in urban environments.
I had dengue fever around 2009. We were tested for it. They came by to see how many people had it. And I think there were 25 cases. Dengue fever is something I would never wish on anybody. It's an excruciating thing. I had it for, I don't really know how long because I was not very conscious when I had it. You have these pains where you feel like your bones have been broken. You have diarrhea, you throw up. It's like having a super, super bad flu. You have kids here, you have a whole community. We're a big tourist destination, and you don't want to have a lot of people coming down and saying, I'm going to cancel my trip. I don't want to get that dang fever, you know. It's something that we really should address as a problem.
And they published something on the newspaper about the possible release of genetic modified mosquitoes, and that's where it started catching my attention. Also to via Facebook through another friends and organizations.
When we first heard about this, it was in December, and there was supposed to be a planned release in January. Then we found out that for over a 2-year period, a 1.5 year period, there have been journals, there have been things in the New York Times, the Atlantic Monthly, all over the world. In Germany, there were these publications about how Key West was at the forefront of releasing genetically modified mosquitoes.
At this town hall meeting, residents of Key West are being presented with the idea and the science behind it for the first time.
I'm delighted to be here today. I think this technology is new. It's much easier to explain it face-to-face in many ways. We're not a big company with huge budgets. And I think the more we can get in front of people and explain it, the better it is.
This breaks my heart to think that you guys have the nerve to come here and do this to our community. It hurts.
When it was any official meeting or any kind locally level, I went and I tried to give it my opinion.
If you live here, that's kind of outrageous because there hasn't, up till then, there hadn't been one whisper of this to us.
It's not the first time Key West has been dumped on by chemicals and crap. They did this back in the 40s and the 50s. No, we're not a testing ground for crap. I, for one, don't care about your scientific crap. I don't care about money you spend. You're not going to cram something down my throat that I don't want. I feel like my life is being threatened. I'm drinking fluoridated water. I'm breathing God knows what they're pushing in the air. I'm eating Monsanto freaking corn. You know, now I'm about to be bit by some kind of bionic or bio something, another mosquito.
I'm actually not really against the idea of genetically modified insects. What is very upsetting is the way Oxitec has gone about its business.
The fact that they're sneaking it in on us and not telling us about it, I think it's all good cause for concern.
If you look at the history of Oxitec in the Cayman Islands and in Malaysia, Mexico, and any of the places that Brazil, where they have been working, they have not been upfront with the public.
As a mother of 3 kids, I'm not opposite to mosquito control to use the technology. I am all for technology, but I don't want you to experiment with my kids. It's just the way it is.
Okay, one big screen?
Perfect.
Okay, good. All right. So you can see the kind of real life picture of where the timing was with all of this. And it started a kind of an uproar that if you look at the actual numbers of people, it was a very small portion of the population, relatively speaking, but it took all of our time. Change.org petition was started. I used to like Change.org, but came to really dislike it after we did some looking into it, but wasn't much new information after that. Let's see if I can. So, for example, this public petition, there were approximately 120,000 signatures in July 2013 against the release. So we randomly chose a little over 5,000 of them, of 50,000 signatures, so roughly 10%. And we found that 83% of them were from outside of Florida, 16% were from Florida, 0.27% for the Keys themselves, and 0.35% were from Key West. So you could, most of the headlines said, you know, Key West is against this thing, and then we looked at some of them Key West, and it turned out that one of my employees was trying to see how it worked and had signed it 9 times, and she actually was in charge of the program, so it wasn't like she was against the program, but she had signed it 9 times herself, all with the same name, but it popped up as 9 different, 9 people against it. So the numbers on change.org, I'm highly suspicious of. So just if you happen to see a change.org, it's good for a lot of things, but it's certainly not a valid survey tool. So essentially, some of the summarize what we saw with that. I'm pretty short on time. It's 12:45. Let me just jump right ahead to a summary slide that explains. Actually, I'm going to do one actual official. Hold on. An academically valid. There we go. Can you see that pie chart?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is a survey that was done by North Carolina State. We've had a lot of interest from some communication people, and Dr. Michael Cobb was really helpful with us in looking at this. So he did a face-to-face survey. They also did a mail-in survey, but as Julia was mentioning, and tried to do a phone survey, but neither of those could get enough valid responses to be that they could really use. So the face-to-face survey was the most expensive and difficult to do it correctly, but also the most valid. So what they found, and this was in 2013, so basically two years into it, that the support was, again, about 2/3 strongly supporting, 70% neutral, and then about 23% were either opposing or strongly opposing. So that had been an increase over those 2 years. And then the question became of what percentage of the population should be in favor before you do it for a public health response, if we feel that this was a valid method to reduce disease. Is it, is somewhere over 2/3, 3/4 of the population sufficient? Oh, sorry, I lost it there. So there's a lot more to this story, but I'm just going to go to lessons learned, and then if there's questions, we can jump into that. Let's see if I can pull that up. Oh, hold on. Sorry, this is not acting normally with the multiple screens. There we go. Okay. Can you see the lessons learned slide? Sorry again for the.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. All right. So what this in a nutshell, what we learned about the public interaction there was the most important factor of anything at all was trust in the messenger or distrust of the messenger. If a world-renowned entomologist came, which we had, a geneticist, we had brought a geneticist in, world-renowned, came in and said something, and the public didn't trust them, it did not matter. Everything, all their background made no difference. Whereas if a pillar in the community who had no science background felt that they were dangerous, the mosquitoes were dangerous, then that made all the difference in the world, especially if that pillar in the community owned multiple businesses and people's livelihoods depended upon them. So there was a sort of a political view, or sort of financial survival view. But trust was the biggest thing. I found that if I said something, people were more likely to believe it than if the Oxitec scientist, who was 10 times the scientist I'll ever be, would say it, simply because they trusted me because I lived there than the scientist from England. Huge. I can't say that I could, if I end it there, that would be the best part of the talk. The second part is we talked about word choices. Julie made made some excellent points about that in messaging. That is enormous too. I don't know how many times I was told that I admitted something. I was explained something, and if it was negative, I admitted it. If it was positive, then I explained it. Words being used. Also learned that TV and text media is free, which is great. Free publicity, but often factually incorrect and usually emotionally charged, which didn't help the cause much, because it wasn't not supposed to be about emotions, but about the science. Fourth, we should not have assumed that a numerical majority equals a public perception of a majority. The perception of majority was, very much brought on by how loud the minority was. Secondly, is that I hadn't realized in reality that numerical probability is not easily understood by the public, or is not. I should have not easily understood, not understood. It was when we tried to explain the number of, say, mosquitoes, female mosquitoes that would be released, saying 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million, 1 in a billion, it didn't really matter. All it mattered was that one was. So the probability of being bit by a mosquito, it was almost impossible to explain that. What we should have done is provided much more simple data and answers early in the process instead of trying to actually explain the science. The problem is that I, coming in as an entomologist, was trying to assume that if I carefully and scientifically explain the entire process in detail, and the geneticists who work for Oxitec did the same, that people would understand that to some degree and then trust us. And essentially what we found was the longer our explanation, the less people listened. And the clear part of that was we created a presentation. We brought in experts from all over the world, and we had a large protest before it. And everybody stormed into our boardroom, and there was kind of a shouting match type thing, and they said what they wanted to say. And then the scientists got up to explain the process and everyone, all but 4 of the 50 or 60 of protesters left. And so we lost the audience that we were hoping to explain the science to. And then finally, this is kind of a joke, but that Jurassic Park movie is not actually based on real science, because the majority of people who are above quotes against the genetic modification in very many cases would quote Jurassic Park as their scientific source, knowingly or unknowingly. So that's supposed to be funny, but there's a little bit of irony and in that statement. But that was sort of the rough and tumble of the publicity around that from the 2012 to 2016 timeframe. So with that, I will go to questions, and looks like I've gone 53 minutes. My apologies. There's a lot to it.
So Mike, out of curiosity, once you said this was 2012 to 2016.
Yes.
Is Key West still using these genetically modified mosquitoes, or did that stop at some point?
Well, so the ending of that story, it's not ended yet, but the end of the story was I resigned in August of 2016, and I have the illustrious honor of being the first director to leave voluntarily. And the reason I left was multifaceted, mostly family reasons, being close to my wife and my family. But right before I left, the board decided to put this to a public vote. They were really tired of being on the hot seat, of being for or against it, and several, would kind of go back and forth. So they voted to have a public referendum of should it occur, which I was against that, sort of putting scientific reasoning to a public vote of, is this science true or not by a public vote. But they were insisted upon that. And so I managed to convince them to do a county-wide referendum to or not to release genetically modified mosquitoes. And so I left in September, and the vote was in November. And it passed in 29 of the 31 precincts in the county. So overwhelmingly passed yes to do it. The downside is that our FDA authorization to do the release was in one of the precincts that voted against it. Kind of the not in my backyard. There's a story behind that too, but so it was dead in the water at that point. And since then, FDA recalled their jurisdiction, transferred it to EPA. EPA started the process, and in the midst of that, Oxitec, the company, actually got a second generation mosquito, also genetically modified, but genetically modified better, and they gave that to EPA, and EPA approved that in record time. It was like a year. So that was approved, and the keys are supposed to start doing releases like any day now. But there's been a problem because the environmental group who's against it has promised to vandalize any property that does releases on their property. So it's been unofficially on hold until they can figure out how to do that without harming the property owners or their property. So long story. So I'll keep my answer short from this point on.
Well, and then let me ask one follow-up, because I was involved with similar type of thing where I was seen as the bad guy because I was working on a project in New Mexico and we were trying to do natural hazard mitigation, and the local elected official had a beef to grind with Homeland Security. And because I was there working with FEMA, I was part of Homeland Security, so therefore I was the bad guy. And it was really disheartening for me to know in my heart that I was there to try and help provide resources to make this community safer and more resilient to wildfires and flooding and all the things that they were dealing with. And I was being literally cussed out in a public meeting by a state representative. And it made me never want to go back to that place again, and made me never care about what happened to those people again. So how did you handle kind of like the stress of being associated with this project, that even though the majority of the people weren't against it, there was a really vocal minority that was?
It was a unique place in that it's like living in a small town. There's only 25,000 people in Key West. And so so you see all of the people who are for it and against it on a regular basis. And so everything was personal. It wasn't like you can go to work and get away from it. My, would get all that at the grocery store. My kids, soccer games, would overhear people arguing about it. So it was all very personal, which was ultimately, was one of the reasons that we decided to move north, was because it had a negative impact on the kids. But on the positive side, you were forced to see the opposition face to face all the time. So it was better than Facebook and such now, where you can just yell at people and then disappear. You had to yell at them in person and see them, sit next to them at your Little League baseball game on Saturday. But it did, as a scientist, it was very disheartening because, or as a public servant, I guess, because you're trying to do the right thing for what you think are the right reasons, and you're stemming it on every turn. Not to say that there shouldn't be public involvement in all of this, and this is where, I appreciate like Julie's view on this, too, is that it does affect the entire public, but the entire public doesn't have all of the details about either the genetic background of what it is. Very few people understand that. I don't understand all of it for sure. But how to control the information on what is safe and what isn't safe, and what will happen if you get bit, what happens if you don't. And that information was totally out of our hands. And that was the hardest part of just not wanting to give up. But because I was responsible for mosquito diseases in that whole county, I couldn't have, it was my job not to give up. So I kept moving on with it, despite the issues. And, it still helped on it from a distance after it was done, or after I'd left, which was easier. If you want a good summary, there's a very good article by the Tampa Bay Times. It was late in 2016. I'll find the link for it that summarizes this whole thing. It's there were lots and lots of terrible articles, hundreds of terrible articles, but this one was quite good. I'm very, very impressed with this, the abilities of this journalist to kind of capture the entire process. I'll find that link and put it in the chat if anybody wants to follow up and listen to it.
And I'll be quiet because I can ask questions about this because I have experience being on the Mike Doyle side of being yelled at. So.
Yeah, I get yelled at a lot. If I tried to be a soccer rep for one season, and I remember one time I was out on the field and I made a call and somebody from the sidelines yelled, "That was a terrible call. You couldn't see that, just like you can't see that GM mosquitoes are going to kill all of us." And you're like, there's no way to get away from this. I can't even ref a kid's soccer game without this being part of the equation. But yeah, I feel happy to, especially anything to do with public relations, because here was the issue. It was myself. I had a public relations person on her staff, but her role up to that point had been very easy to digest public education messages. And honestly, she'd been silent for 2 years because of all the negative public stuff amongst the staff and the jail time and all of that thing. So it was myself and Oxitec, and both of us were scientists and honestly did not understand how to communicate with the public in general. And, hence us way overdoing the science and way underdoing the message.
So Mike, Paula wants to know long-term, how are you going to measure if the program works? And so Paula, I don't know if that has to do with the outreach side or if the actual release of the mosquitoes works. Oh, the release. Okay, so I guess because it hasn't happened yet, right?
Right, it hasn't happened yet. Yep. Or it may be happening now, but they haven't told us. That I've intentionally stayed out of it, and so I could have culpability if a reporter called. I can honestly say I don't know. So I have not. I've told them not to tell me when the releases are going to happen. But how? It's really the how you measure if it's working or not. There's two measurements. One is the proportion of natural wild mosquitoes, I'll call them wild mosquitoes, versus genetically modified mosquitoes in the environment. So you go and you put traps around the test area, collect mosquitoes, and then the genetically modified mosquitoes have a gene inserted that's fluorescent. So literally put the mosquito under a scope and they glow. And so you can physically count the GM mosquitoes versus the non-GM. And how it works is that if the GM mosquitoes are out there mating with with wild mosquitoes, the proportion of wild mosquitoes will go down to close to zero. And then when you have mostly GM mosquitoes, they're just emerging, but they can't reproduce. Then you can start reducing the number of releases. And this has been demonstrated in Brazil, in Indonesia, where they've done larger releases. And it reduced the population of mosquitoes about 90, it depends, anywhere from 80 to 99%, depending on the area. So it's a very scientific way to do it, which is nice. It's hard numbers, which I like.
So from a spatial standpoint, you said you have these different precincts. And so the idea is then to release them within certain precincts, or is this going to be released countywide?
In the beginning, the reason the Keys are such a good place to do this is they're islands. They're physical islands. And the Aedes aegypti is a very poor flyer. So it's not going to fly a mile over ocean. Other species will. Some species will fly 40 miles over the ocean. But Aedes aegypti won't do that. It's very skittish and secretive. If it flies, across a few yards, that's a lot for it. So the releases would happen in either an isolated part of one island or an entire island, depending on the size. And then that, if it was successful there, then you would then move it to the next island, then the next island, and move, right up or down the chain from there. Right now, the idea is to do it in an isolated section of, there's 2 or 3 islands that will work really well, that have high concentration of people and houses, but they're surrounded by a bay or maybe just some, some type of bridge that takes them to the main area. So it's very unlikely to have mosquitoes coming in or out. Does that answer the question?
It did for me, and it looks like it addressed the questions for Paula as well.
So the question about genetics, yes, it's essentially you're releasing sterile mosquitoes who mate. It's kind of like birth control for mosquitoes in a short way. They mate with the local mosquitoes who don't have offspring, or have offspring that don't survive. And it's the same process that's been done with fruit flies, like the whole medfly project in California that was very successful, where they released millions of sterilized medflies. That crashed the population. It's actually being done with a fly in Panama, the Isthmus of Panama. For the last 30 years, they've been releasing an insect there as a border between South America and North America to keep it's a parasitic fly on livestock. And it was eradicated from the entirety of Florida, all the Gulf states, all of Texas, down Mexico, all the way down to, all the way down to South America, and eliminated from the entire area, from the whole northern continent, and then is being held at bay at Panama Canal. There's about a 30-mile stretch that they fly and release millions of these sterile males. They're doing it once or twice a week for 30 years. to essentially keep those flies from coming north. It's very successful. It's amazingly successful. So that's the idea. Mosquitoes are tougher because they live around houses.
Yeah, Paula's got a comment in there about adding GM to her science class, and and I don't know. I think that part of it, I wonder if it's not even just like a nomenclature thing, because we say genetically modified, but we could argue that our whole civilization and agriculture is based on our ability to genetically modify animals and plants to do things we want them to do. I mean,
right.
Gregor Mendel was genetically modifying things to prove how genes worked. So we obviously have been doing it for generations before we even knew what it was.
Right. And the difference here, which freaks people out, again, this image, is when you say, well, if you say, well, we bred these mosquitoes to do X or Y, well, they're all mosquitoes and they have mosquito genes. That's, people can sort of accept that. It's when you say, oh, we took a cabbage gene and a coral gene and a gene, a part of a gene from the herpes virus, and put it in the mosquito. And as soon as you say that, in fact, in that video you saw, the public event, somebody said, I heard that these mosquitoes have herpes. You get bit by one, you get an STD. So all you need is just that fraction of a gene from the herpes virus. And so it's that unnaturalness that is what freaks people out. And I don't blame them. It sounds kind of Frankensteinish, which yeah, we end up, the mosquitoes were called Frankenskeeters, became the logo. And I trust me, my public relations person did not put that out and tried to stop it, but if someone coins a very catchy term, you can't pull it back. And we multiple times tried to change the term from GM to something else, and none of our attempts worked. It always went back to the most scary sounding term.
You should have made T-shirts with Frankenskeeters and sold them. That could have funded all your research.
That's a good point. I should probably look into that as a moonlight job. That would be good.
Well, y'all, is there anybody else that has questions or comments for Mike before we let him go today?
I'll just make a quick comment. We teach journalism classes. We teach people to write said. Always say said, even if it sounds repetitious, because once, like you said, once you got in there, you're explaining or you were admitting and claiming. That's really annoying that journalists don't adopt that rule that we try to push on them.
Yes. Well, I came to really appreciate good journalism versus bad journalism. And I could usually sense it by the second or third question in the interview.
How's that?
Because if the interview was, please explain how this works, that was good. If they originally said, I understood that you admitted that 3% of these mosquitoes did such and such. If it started off with an accusation, then I knew where it was going. And I sometimes would cut off interviews, but I learned not to do that, because then the article ends up being worse, because then they're angry.
Yeah.
And being cut off. So I generally would finish it, but not give as much information as before. But I didn't know anything about journalism before this, but I definitely could sense a good journalist versus a not good journalist. One's looking just for sensationalism versus looking for actually explaining the situation.
And a lot of journalists don't have much in the way of science background.
Right.
They go into journalism in part because they don't like numbers and scary science things. So words are much more comfortable. And we've been working on trying to change that. There's a lot more science journalism in universities now than there used to be.
Yeah, and there were some good ones. You could tell that they were essentially like the health and science editor for such and such art, for New York Times or whatnot. And those were generally good, longer and more in depth, and less focused on the 1% sensational and got more into the, the 50% of reality.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
They did the
Thank you.
genetically modified here in Chattanooga for the West Nile, and I don't know how it was presented, but we didn't really get all that excited about how bringing in the mosquitoes, because it was explained to everybody that they're not capable of reproducing and whatever. But I just don't remember us getting really up in arms about it. So it's just, I guess, how people view it.
Right. Well, what's often there's been two types of mosquitoes that are sterile, and one is infected with a bacteria. It's called Wolbachia is the name of the bacteria, and it makes the mosquito sterile. That's one method of sterilizing. The other is genetically modification, and there's 2 or 3 others, but those are the 2 main in the United States. And the bacterially sterilized mosquitoes, like you're saying, have raised almost no concern whatsoever, and because they're natural. It's a natural bacteria, and I mean, there's a lot of very dangerous natural bacterias, but it's still my experience is people are still more comfortable with a dangerous but comfortably known thing than a maybe not dangerous but unknown thing like GM. So yeah, it makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I think those were Wolbachia infected, if I understand right, in Tennessee, right?
I don't remember. I just remember that they were told to us that what they're releasing were mosquitoes that could not reproduce, and that would reduce the population, and everybody went, good.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I won't say everybody, but it was not a huge outcry.
Yeah, that had to be Wolbachia, because their GM mosquitoes have not been released in the U.S. so far. But Wolbachia infected mosquitoes have been in, I think there's 17 states where it's registered now. So Tennessee, I think, is one of those. But you're right. Yeah, I didn't hear much about it. It makes perfect sense. All right. Well, thank you. I'll look for the links for those articles, and I'll put those here in the chat here just a moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yep.